Edwin Carter was standing near the entrance of his prestigious restaurant, Maison de Prestige, watching the night's diners with the critical eye he had honed over the years. This place wasn't just a high-end restaurant, it was the symbol of Edwin's success, located in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods of the city. Known for its exquisite French cuisine and impeccable service, Maison de Prestige attracted an exclusive clientele: lawyers, politicians, celebrities, and business tycoons. Edwin had built his restaurant's reputation from the ground up, and it was now the preferred place of the elite, a haven of privacy and sophistication that found no comparison. For Edwin, preserving the image of his restaurant was essential. Every detail mattered. From the linen tablecloths to the fresh flowers precisely arranged on each table, the atmosphere had to be impeccable. The soft lights of the crystal chandeliers gave the venue a warm glow, while classical music resonated faintly in the background, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance. Edwin prided himself on making sure that only a particular type of customer walked through the doors of his restaurant. He was a man of distinction, in his 60s, and with grey hair perfectly combed back. Her custom-made suit fit impeccably, reflecting the authority that emanated in every gesture. Although his manners were refined, those who knew him well knew that his opinions about who deserved to be in his establishment were not as polished as his appearance. His pride lay in his ability to subtly judge people based on their appearance or where they came from, and he often made decisions about the desirability of certain customers. That night, as Edwin stood in the driveway, he noticed a couple approaching the restaurant. They were elegantly dressed, he in a tailored black suit, and she in a red dress that moved gracefully as she walked. Both exuded sophistication, and their style fit perfectly with the atmosphere of the place. However, Edwin's expression changed as the pair approached. Ethan and Lena Collins were black, and although he did not show his disapproval in an obvious way, those who knew him well would have noticed the subtle change in his expression. Ethan Collins, a tall man with an athletic build, walked with calm confidence. Her deep-toned skin and short, well-groomed hair gave her an air of distinction. Lena, her dark curls framing her face and her eyes full of warmth and intelligence, radiated elegance as she walked past him. For Edwin, however, his breed eclipsed any other quality. He instantly questioned whether they really belonged in his restaurant and whether they matched the image he had so carefully cultivated. When Ethan and Lena arrived at the entrance, Edwin greeted them with his usual practiced courtesy. "Good evening," he said, his tone polished and calculated. "Have you a reservation with us tonight?" "Yes, on behalf of Collins," Ethan replied with a smile. Edwin nodded, but internally he was already forming judgments. He doubted whether that reservation had been a mistake or if, somehow, they had managed to go unnoticed in his rigorous list of reservations. Edwin looked at the maitre, who was a few steps behind him, and with a slight sign he signalled him to check the reservation. After a quick review, the maitre d' confirmed that the reservation was valid. "Ah, yes, Mr. Collins," Edwin replied, without letting his thoughts show. "This way, please." As he guided Ethan and Lena through the restaurant, Edwin noticed the stares of some of the other diners. These were his regular customers, mostly white and used to a certain kind of atmosphere. Several of them raised their eyebrows or exchanged glances that suggested an unspoken understanding, as if they were also questioning the presence of the couple. Edwin, sharing his thoughts, led the couple to a table at the back, near the kitchen doors, away from the center of the main living room. The place where he had seated them was reserved for those whom Edwin considered less desirable. A subtle but intentional tactic to send a message. When they arrived at the table, Edwin motioned for them to sit down with a polished smile. "Here you go. I hope you enjoy your evening with us," he said with the same tone of formality. Ethan and Lena exchanged a brief glance, but said nothing. They settled down at the table, with Ethan pulling back the chair for Lena to take a seat. Edwin stood a moment longer, watching them with a critical eye. Despite their elegance and impeccable demeanor, he only saw what he wanted to see. Two people who, in his judgment, did not fit into his restaurant. "Thank you," Lena said, her voice soft but firm as she nodded politely. "We look forward to a pleasant evening." Edwin nodded slightly and walked away, though he couldn't get the pair out of his mind. Something in his presence made him uncomfortable, a concern that went beyond his physical appearance. It wasn't just that they were black, but that they showed a self-assurance that seemed to challenge their deep-seated prejudices. Edwin was used to the exclusivity of his restaurant intimidating people, but Ethan and Lena felt completely in their element, like they had every right to be there. Back at the entrance, Edwin called the maitre d' and whispered, "Keep an eye on them." "Make sure everything is in order." The maitre d' nodded, catching the underlying tone in Edwin's words. As the night wore on, Edwin continued to cast glances at Ethan and Lena's table, hoping to find something to justify his discomfort. However, the couple kept their composure throughout, chatting quietly and checking the menu, as if they were unaware of the stares some of the other customers were directing at them. For Ethan and Lena, that night was special. They were celebrating their 10th anniversary, a milestone they had been looking forward to, and they wanted to mark the occasion in a special place. They had chosen Maison de Prestige not only because of its reputation, but because they felt that, after years of work and effort, they deserved to enjoy an experience in such a highly prestigious place. However, from the moment they walked through the door, they felt the tension in the air. They perceived the coldness in Edwin's smile and the discomfort of the waiters as they approached his table. Although they were no strangers to subtle discrimination, they hoped that this night could be different. With patience and determination, they decided not to let Edwin's attitude ruin their celebration. They had learned to navigate these kinds of situations, to overcome the microaggressions that seemed to follow them wherever they went. Tonight was theirs, and they wouldn't let Edwin take that moment away from them. As the evening progressed, Edwin continued to feel that Ethan and Lena's presence altered the perfect atmosphere of his restaurant. He decided to take more direct action. He instructed staff to delay service at his table. While the other tables received their dishes on time, Ethan and Lena's entrances were slow to arrive. The couple noticed the delay, but instead of complaining, they opted to enjoy their water and continue chatting with each other, showing no signs of discomfort. Edwin watched everything from his position at the entrance, hoping that the delay would provoke some reaction. However, Ethan and Lena continued to show an unflappable calm, which only increased Edwin's frustration. In his mind, they seemed to defy his restaurant's unwritten rules, and that irritated him. Finally, a young waiter, visibly nervous, approached his table with the appetizers. He placed the plates in front of them and muttered, "I'm sorry for the delay." Ethan smiled at her and thanked the waiter politely, while Lena nodded kindly. Edwin, from his position, could not take his eyes off the couple. It seemed that the more he tried to make them feel out of place, the more they grew stronger in his serene posture. The situation was beginning to make him desperate, and he felt his control over the atmosphere of his restaurant fading. Unwilling to give in, Edwin decided to intervene personally. He adjusted his jacket, adopted his rehearsed smile, and walked over to Ethan and Lena's table. The couple watched him approach, keeping their expressions calm but alert. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins," Edwin began with a softness in tone that betrayed a hint of condescension, "I hope you are enjoying your evening." "Yes, thank you," Lena replied, her tone calm and well-measured. "I'm glad to hear that," Edwin said, nodding slowly. "I wanted to personally make sure that everything is to his liking. We strive to maintain an exceptional experience here at Maison de Prestige, and it would be a shame if something did not meet their expectations." Ethan nodded, sensing the suggestion implicit in Edwin's words, but he kept his composure. "Everything has been fine so far. We appreciate your attention," he replied firmly. Edwin's face tightened almost imperceptibly, but he quickly regained control. "It's rare to see new faces in our establishment," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Usually our customers are frequent visitors, with whom we share a tacit understanding." Lena raised an eyebrow, perfectly understanding the veiled message. "We understand the importance of atmosphere, and that's why we chose this venue for our celebration," Lena said, holding Edwin's gaze. "It's our anniversary, and we wanted something special." Edwin couldn't help but hesitate. He didn't know it was a special occasion, and for a moment he considered retracting it, but the pride and resentment he had felt all night made him stick to his stance. "Ah, a celebration, I understand," he said, leaning slightly toward them. But I must say, I'm surprised that they chose Maison de Prestige for such a meaningful evening. It's not usually the kind of place to... their customer profile. The words hung in the air, laden with a hint that Ethan and Lena could not ignore, but instead of reacting angrily, Ethan kept a calm look and asked, "Our profile, Mr. Carter? What do you mean by that?" For a moment Edwin hesitated, realizing that he had been too direct. However, he was too compromised to back down now. "We usually receive a specific clientele here," he explained, "people who are looking for an exclusive atmosphere and a refined experience. I'm afraid not everyone appreciates that kind of environment." Ethan and Lena were silent for a moment, taking in the implication. Finally, Ethan replied, "I understand. And I assure you, Mr. Carter, that we know the value of this place. That's why we're here." Edwin pursed his lips. Ethan and Lena's calmness seemed to mock him, refusing to give in to his provocations. "Of course," he finally said, unable to hide his discomfort. "I just wanted to make sure they're comfortable." With that, Edwin turned around and walked away, frustrated that he hadn't managed to make the couple feel out of place. As the night wore on, his attempts to make them uncomfortable continued. He instructed staff to avoid the Collins table or serve them more distantly. However, every snub, every delay was greeted with unwavering serenity from Ethan and Lena. Meanwhile, they understood well what was happening, and although they had felt rejection since they entered, they remained determined to enjoy their special night. They had worked hard to get to where they were, and they wouldn't let Edwin take that satisfaction away from them. Edwin, watching them from a distance, began to feel more and more uneasy. He had hoped that his subtle insinuations and attitudes would affect them, but all he seemed to achieve was to show his own discomfort. As the night wore on at Maison de Prestige, Edwin found himself increasingly annoyed to see how Ethan and Lena continued to enjoy their dinner, seemingly immune to his attempts to make them uncomfortable. The elegance with which they both carried themselves, and the respect they showed towards the staff, only highlighted Edwin's prejudices. Determined to reassert his authority, Edwin instructed the staff to delay the serving of their entrees even further. The other customers, mostly regulars at the restaurant, received impeccable and prompt service, while Ethan and Lena's table was at the bottom of the list. Noticing this delay, Ethan and Lena looked at each other for a moment, exchanging a silent smile, but continued to chat quietly. Finally, the waiter arrived with the main courses, with a nervous expression as he placed the plates in front of them. "Excuse the delay," he murmured, avoiding eye contact. Ethan smiled politely and thanked him, which seemed to ease the young man's tension somewhat. From his stall, Edwin watched everything with a mixture of frustration and irritation. I expected to see some sign of discomfort or annoyance from the couple, but all I saw was calm and dignity. The serenity with which they handled the situation only intensified their discontent. As dinner wore on, Edwin continued to cast glances at them, waiting for any hint that would justify their displeasure. However, Ethan and Lena behaved impeccably, oblivious to the discomfort that their presence generated in the owner of the restaurant. For Edwin, this wasn't just a dinner. He felt that the presence of the couple challenged the very essence of what his restaurant represented. Unable to bear his own discontent any longer, Edwin once again approached Ethan and Lena's table. With a tense smile, he said, "I hope everything is to your liking. I'm sorry if the service has been a little slower than usual. We strive to maintain a level of exclusivity here." Ethan nodded, thanking Edwin for his comment with the same courtesy he'd shown all night. "We appreciate your interest," he replied calmly. "We feel well taken care of." For the first time, Edwin realized that it would not be easy to intimidate them. The confidence that Ethan and Lena projected seemed unshakable, and that made him more uncomfortable than he could admit. Ethan and Lena's composure was beginning to make Edwin feel more and more uncomfortable. He returned to the entrance of the restaurant, unable to concentrate on anything but the couple. He couldn't accept that they, with their poise and confidence, seemed to challenge his preconceived ideas of who should take a place in his exclusive restaurant. For Edwin, Maison de Prestige was a sanctuary for a certain kind of people, and the presence of Ethan and Lena represented, in his mind, an intrusion into that sanctuary. Determined to exert control, Edwin gave a more direct instruction to the maître. Check your reservation once more, just to make sure everything is in order." The maître, although surprised by Edwin's insistence, knew that he should not question his decisions. He nodded and went to check the details of the reservation. A few minutes later, the maitre d' returned to confirm that the reservation was indeed valid. Edwin, frustrated at not finding any mistakes that would give him a reason to confront the couple, felt that his patience was at its limit. It was unusual for someone to challenge his authority, let alone in his own restaurant. Determined to make his presence felt, Edwin approached the Collins table again. This time his smile was even more forced, and his tone showed a slight tinge of hostility disguised as politeness. "Mr. Collins, Mrs. Collins," he began, with a note of condescension in his voice. "I wanted to make sure you're enjoying your evening. As you may know, Maison de Prestige prides itself on providing a unique experience, and we want our guests to feel completely satisfied." Lena, catching the underlying message, kept her gaze calm and replied, "Everything has been fine. We appreciate your concern, Mr. Carter." Edwin felt a slight tremor of frustration in his voice. "Well, I'm glad to hear it," he said, though his words lacked sincerity. "It's rare to see new faces in our establishment, especially for an occasion as special as its anniversary." He paused for a moment before adding with an almost defiant tone, "I imagine Maison de Prestige is something different from what you're used to." Ethan stared at him for a moment before answering, maintaining his polite tone. "We appreciate the unique atmosphere of your restaurant, Mr. Carter. That's precisely why we decided to celebrate here." Edwin couldn't help but stiffen his smile. Ethan and Lena's presence seemed to defy every prejudice he jealously guarded. Seeing that the couple showed no signs of discomfort or intimidation, she began to notice something that generated even more anxiety: her own insecurity at the possibility of losing control of her space. The evening went on, and though Edwin tried to hide it, it was evident that the control he thought he had over the situation was beginning to slip out of his hands. As the night wore on, Edwin couldn't shake the uneasy feeling of Ethan and Lena's presence. The couple's confidence and poise baffled him, and frustration began to build up inside him. Determined that he would not let this intrusion go unpunished, he devised one last attempt to make them feel unwelcome. Edwin called the waiter and ordered him, in a thinly veiled tone of voice, to bring the bill to the Collins table, subtly suggesting that the couple must consider their time there to be over. The waiter hesitated for a moment, uncomfortable with the request, but aware of Edwin's authority, he complied. When the waiter handed the bill to Ethan and Lena's table, they exchanged a glance. They understood the message immediately, but instead of reacting with annoyance, they maintained the same calm that had characterized them all night. Ethan pulled out his credit card, paid the bill without comment, and thanked the waiter with a polite smile. The latter was visibly embarrassed, but Ethan and Lena did their best not to make him uncomfortable. As she stood up, Lena looked at Edwin from a distance, maintaining dignity in her posture. The couple made their way to the exit, with a calmness that seemed to defy Edwin's attempts to impose his hostility. Just before leaving, however, Ethan turned around and, in a calm but firm tone, said, "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Carter. Despite what you may think, I assure you that we know how to value a place like this. Perhaps, in the future, we can see each other again in different circumstances." Edwin felt a knot of frustration inside him when he saw that his efforts had failed to disturb the couple. However, the suggestion in Ethan's words left him with a sense of bewilderment and a latent doubt that he could not shake. As Ethan and Lena left Maison de Prestige, Edwin stood by the entrance, watching the other customers slowly turn their attention to their dishes. But for the first time, he felt his grip on his own restaurant begin to crack, as if something inside him was warning him that the events of that night could have consequences he didn't yet understand. Ethan and Lena left the restaurant and walked silently to their car. They both knew that this night had been a test of patience and endurance, and though they had hoped to find an atmosphere of exclusivity and sophistication, they had not anticipated the prejudice disguised as politeness that Edwin had shown. However, that night he had also revealed something deeper about his own strengths, a strength that they both valued and that united them. Inside the restaurant, Edwin was still disturbed. He had hoped that the couple would react in some more obvious way, something that would allow him to justify his displeasure. But Ethan and Lena had shown no signs of discomfort. On the contrary, they seemed more in control of the situation than he himself. That dignity that they firmly maintained, despite Edwin's attempts to make them feel out of place, began to make him doubt his own methods. That night, Edwin couldn't sleep well. Despite convincing himself that he had done the right thing by defending the image of his restaurant, an echo of unease continued to resonate in his mind. For the first time, he began to wonder if his concept of exclusivity was as unshakable as he thought it was, or if, at some point, his prejudices were blinding him. However, his thoughts quickly returned to their usual justification. Maison de Prestige was a place reserved only for those who shared his vision of elegance. A few days passed since that night, and Edwin managed to calm down. He was convinced that, after all, the episode with the Collins was just an awkward anecdote, something he could forget. He resumed his daily routine at the restaurant, and life went on as usual, or so he thought. One morning, while checking correspondence in his office, his assistant came in with a fancy envelope in his hand. "Mr. Carter, this came today. It seems important," he said, placing the envelope on his desk. Edwin took the envelope, noticing the quality of the paper and logo of a high-profile law firm that he recognized. Intrigued, he opened the envelope and found a letter printed on luxury paper. The menu, written with a professional and precise tone, expressed a customer's interest in acquiring Maison de Prestige along with other Edwin restaurants. The proposal spoke of a generous offer, detailing that the buyer was willing to pay above the market value. The letter invited Edwin to a private meeting to discuss the terms of the agreement, assuring him that the client was a prominent figure in the industry and that he wished to remain anonymous until the first talks were formalized. Edwin felt a surge of emotion. Although he had never considered selling the restaurant, the offer was attractive, and the idea of retiring with a large sum of money was beginning to seem like an interesting possibility. He immediately called the firm and arranged a meeting for the next day. The prospect of a high-level negotiation and the possibility of securing his financial future gave him a sense of anticipation that he had not felt for a long time. The next day, Edwin arrived at the elegant office building where the firm was located. He was guided to a meeting room with large windows that showed the city from above. He settled into one of the luxurious leather armchairs, admiring the sophisticated atmosphere of the place, and imagined himself as the protagonist of a monumental business. The door to the room opened, and Edwin stood up, expecting to see a partner in the firm or the mystery shopper himself. However, when his eyes fell on the people who entered, his expression froze. In front of him were Ethan and Lena Collins, dressed in impeccable suits and accompanied by a team of lawyers and financial advisors who sat next to him with a professional expression. For a moment, Edwin could not comprehend what was happening. Ethan, with a subtle smile on his face, reached out and said, "Thank you for coming, Mr. Carter. We appreciate that you took the time to discuss this proposal." Ethan's calm voice and Lena's determined gaze made it clear that they were in charge of the situation. Edwin sat up, still dazed, and tried to pull himself together, struggling to keep his composure. He began, unable to complete the question. Lena leaned over to him and calmly explained, "My husband and I own several companies in the hospitality industry. What happened the other night was not just a celebration, but an evaluation. We wanted to see firsthand how Maison de Prestige works, and we concluded that it could be a valuable addition to our portfolio." Edwin felt a mixture of confusion and frustration, but he couldn't deny the reality in front of him. The offer was legitimate, and they had all the resources necessary to acquire their restaurant, especially now that they were backing it with a reputable law firm. Edwin, caught between bewilderment and humiliation, tried to remain calm as Ethan continued to speak. "My wife and I are prepared to make you a generous offer. We believe that Maison de Prestige has great potential under renewed management, which focuses prestige on excellence and inclusivity." Edwin was trying to process what he was hearing. The very couple he had tried to make feel out of place were not only interested in his restaurant, but were willing to buy it at a considerably high price. The irony of the situation left him speechless, and for the first time in years, Edwin felt disoriented and out of control. "What if I reject this offer?" asked Edwin, trying to regain control over the situation, although his tone betrayed his insecurity. Lena exchanged a glance with Ethan before replying, "You have every right to do so, Mr. Carter. However, let me tell you that, should you decline, we will not hesitate to share our experience from the other night, as well as our vision of what we think your concept of exclusivity represents. In today's world, reputation is very fragile and businesses need to adapt to the evolution of their customers." Edwin felt a chill on his back. I knew that a bad review or a story exposing his attitude could damage the image of Maison de Prestige forever. In his mind, he began to catch glimpses of headlines of articles in which the incident would be recounted. The story would spread quickly, and his restaurant, a symbol of prestige, would be marked forever. Fighting his own pride, Edwin nodded slowly. I knew I didn't have many options. "Very well, I am willing to listen to your terms," he said, forcing a smile that could not hide his resignation. Ethan calmly took the floor. "The offer is simple. We want to buy the entirety of Maison de Prestige and the other restaurants under its brand. The deal includes the condition that you go out of business without making any future statements or interference. We want a clean transition." Edwin's expression tightened at the sound of those words. The thought of losing all stake in his own business was a blow to his ego, but the financial offer was so generous that he forced himself to consider the proposal seriously. "I understand," Edwin said, taking a deep breath. "But why do they want me to retire completely? I've worked all my life to build this. It's my legacy." Lena responded, maintaining a professional but firm tone. "Mr. Carter, we value excellence, but we believe in a kind of hospitality that embraces everyone, not just those who meet certain expectations. Your restaurant has potential, but it needs a change of vision." Edwin knew Lena's words were true. He had built an exclusive space, but that exclusivity was limited by his own ideas and prejudices. Facing this reality, expressed by the very partner I had belittled, made the situation even more difficult to accept. "We will make sure to honor the quality you established," Ethan continued, "but under a perspective that fosters inclusion and respect. We want Maison de Prestige to thrive and evolve." Edwin, sensing his options running out, looked at Ethan and Lena with a mixture of resignation and bitterness. He knew that this transaction would bring him a good sum of money, but he was also aware that his influence over the place he had built would disappear. Edwin leaned back in his seat, weighing Ethan and Lena's words as the reality of the situation became more and more apparent to him. He tried to muster the last shred of pride he had left and asked, in a tone that was meant to be firm, "What if I decide to reject the terms of your proposal?" Ethan looked at him, calm, but with a determination that left little room for doubt. "If you reject our offer, we will not only withdraw from this negotiation, but we will ensure that our expertise at Maison de Prestige is known. It will not be a simple anecdote. It will be an example of how an exclusionary attitude can damage the reputation of any business." Edwin felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. It was the first time he had been in a situation where he had no control, and that feeling gnawed at him. However, he understood that his position was compromised. The price to pay for refusing to sell would be even higher than accepting the conditions the couple had imposed on her. "It's okay," Edwin said, barely managing to keep his composure. "I accept your terms." Lena and Ethan exchanged a look of silent satisfaction, and Lena bowed her head in approval. "It's a wise decision, Mr. Carter. We are confident that this transition will be beneficial for both parties." The team of lawyers began drafting the final documents, while Edwin, in a state of resignation, signed each page with the feeling that he was not only handing over his business, but also a part of himself. Every stroke of his signature was a reminder that he had lost control over his own legacy, and although he did not admit it openly, he understood that his prejudices had led him to this situation. Finally, the process concluded. Ethan reached out to seal the deal, and Edwin, in an almost automatic motion, shook it, though his gaze reflected a mixture of bitterness and acceptance. Lena gave him a diplomatic smile, and they both rose, ready to take possession of what was now officially theirs. As the lawyers and advisors said goodbye, Edwin remained in his seat, alone in the meeting room, looking at the documents that symbolized the end of his relationship with Maison de Prestige. He felt his life, built on a series of decisions he believed to be right, crumble in the face of the reality of his own mistakes. From that day on, Maison de Prestige took a new direction under the direction of Ethan and Lena Collins. The couple implemented changes that maintained the standard of excellence, but reflected their commitment to inclusion and respect for all customers, regardless of their background. The decor was updated, and the atmosphere of the place evolved to welcome a diverse clientele. Over time, the restaurant thrived in ways Edwin never imagined. The success of Maison de Prestige under his new leadership became a symbol of positive change for the community, a reminder that true prestige was not to be found in exclusion, but in openness and respect for all who walked through its doors. Edwin, for his part, faced a reality to which he was not accustomed. In the weeks after the sale, he stayed on the sidelines, trying to carry on with his life as usual, but the emptiness he felt was undeniable. He was no longer in control of Maison de Prestige, the place that had been a symbol of his success, and that, in his mind, was a reflection of his own value. However, over time he began to realize that this void was not only the absence of the restaurant, but also the consequence of the decisions he had made throughout his life. He tried to distract himself by focusing on other businesses and projects, but the success of Maison de Prestige under the direction of Ethan and Lena haunted him. Articles in local newspapers and trade magazines began to praise the change in direction, highlighting the renewed inclusive atmosphere and commitment to excellence that Ethan and Lena had implemented. Critics mentioned how the restaurant had been transformed into a vibrant place, where everyone was welcome, and the sense of exclusivity had been redefined as a place where every customer felt valued. Every article, every positive comment, was a reminder to Edwin of what he had lost and ignored for so long. People were now talking about Maison de Prestige not only as a place of high gastronomic quality, but as a business model that embraced diversity and inclusion. Edwin was in a constant state of bitterness and resentment, realizing that his own prejudices had cost him everything he had ever valued. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lena continued to elevate the restaurant to new heights, adapting the business to connect with a clientele Edwin had never considered. The place was now packed every night, with reservations sold out and a waiting list that demonstrated the community's appreciation for the restaurant's new ethos. The diversity of the clientele not only brought more success, but cemented the Maison de Prestige's reputation as a symbol of positive change. As the months passed, Edwin realized that it was he himself who, with his limiting attitude and beliefs, had sealed his fate. Cut off from the life he once dominated, he understood that the world around him had evolved, while he clung to a vision of exclusivity that no longer had a place. The humiliation he'd tried to impose on Ethan and Lena that night had returned to remind him of his own mistakes, and now all he had left was to live with the consequences. As the months passed, Edwin was increasingly relegated to oblivion, while the success of Maison de Prestige under the leadership of Ethan and Lena continued to grow. Local and national magazines began publishing articles about the restaurant, focusing on its transformation and the story of how it had gone from being an exclusive, enclosed place to becoming a warm and welcoming space full of diversity and new opportunities. Ethan and Lena's story captured the interest of many who applauded their determination and vision. Every article, every mention, felt like a stinging reminder to Edwin who, out of pride, avoided visiting the restaurant. However, curiosity and nostalgia eventually led him to do it one night. He walked to the entrance and, observing the atmosphere from outside, he could see that something had changed profoundly. The decor was different, but it hadn't lost the touch of elegance. In fact, it now seemed more vibrant, more alive. The warmth of the place, with a welcoming and approachable atmosphere, seemed to appeal to everyone equally, something he had never imagined or valued. Edwin felt like an outsider as he gazed from a distance at the life he had left behind. A painful feeling of emptiness lodged in his chest as he realized that he himself had created that distance. Everything he had built had become something that no longer belonged to him, and the reason was none other than his own mentality, one that refused to adapt to the times and the people they brought. He decided to go inside and, for the first time in a long time, went unnoticed in the crowd. No one recognized him as the former owner. The restaurant was now a renewed entity with its own spirit. As he watched Ethan and Lena interact with customers, he noticed something he had never imagined. Not only did they run the restaurant, but they also seemed to be part of a real community, one he had never tried to build. The success of Maison de Prestige no longer depended only on its name or reputation, but on the genuine connection it now had with its customers. Feeling a knot in his stomach, Edwin walked out before anyone could recognize him. He walked back home in silence, carrying the weight of his own pride and the bitter realization that it had been his stubbornness that had led him to lose everything. He recalled Lena's words during the negotiation. True prestige is in excellence with openness and respect. At the time, those words had seemed irrelevant to him, but now he understood their true meaning. As time went on, Edwin realized that his life had become trapped in its own prejudices and limitations. What he had considered exclusivity was actually a barrier that isolated him from the change and evolution that he now saw flourishing before him. Faced with loneliness and without a project to fulfill him, Edwin understood that he was no longer the powerful man he once thought he was. True power lay in the ability to adapt, to grow, and to embrace the new. As Maison de Prestige continued to thrive and expand its influence in the community, Edwin became a figure of the past, remembered only as the man who once believed that exclusivity was limited to those who shared his limited vision of success. The lesson had been painful, and though his days now passed in a solitude of his own making, the reality was clear. He had been his own worst enemy, and that clash with his pride and prejudice would be his greatest legacy, a silent, bitter lesson from a man who had finally been overcome by his inability to change. Over the years, Maison de Prestige, under the leadership of Ethan and Lena, became a landmark in the city, an emblematic place where quality and inclusion merged in a unique experience. The story of its transformation even attracted national media, which told how a visionary couple had revitalized a restaurant that was once a symbol of exclusivity and limitation, to turn it into a space where anyone could feel welcome. The story of Ethan and Lena and their success resonated as a lesson that true prestige could exist without barriers. For his part, Edwin had become even more isolated. He spent his days at home, watching from a distance as his legacy took a form he had never imagined or accepted in the past. The sale had left him a considerable sum, but money could not fill the void he felt. He had believed that his success, his vision of an exclusive and elitist place, was unwavering. However, the evolution of Maison de Prestige showed that the true value of a business was in openness and connection with the community, concepts that he had never understood. In his lonely nights, Edwin thought about how he had gotten to this point, how his prejudices and his pride had led him to lose everything. He remembered how he had confronted Ethan and Lena, convinced that they did not belong in his restaurant. Now, ironically, they were the true owners of Maison de Prestige, and they had achieved what he never imagined. To make that place a symbol of respect, inclusion, and genuine success. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lena continued to expand their influence in the industry. They opened new branches under the same concept, maintaining the focus on inclusion, respect, and excellence. With each new project, they demonstrated that the values they stood for were not only ethically sound, but also financially successful. Maison de Prestige was no longer just a restaurant. It was a symbol of change and renewed vision, something that had transcended the simple idea of exclusivity. Edwin watched these achievements from afar, aware that his legacy no longer belonged to him. In his final days, he realized that what weighed on him most was not having lost the business, but not having been able to see his own mistake before. I had learned late that true success was not about keeping others out, but about creating a space where everyone felt valued. That bitter lesson would accompany him forever, leaving in his life an echo of regret that would never disappear. In the end, Edwin's name was left in the past, as the legacy of Maison de Prestige continued in a renewed light, in the hands of those who truly understood the true meaning of success and the value of opening doors, rather than closing them. As time went by, the Maison de Prestige's transformation became an inspiring story. The restaurant, under the direction of Ethan and Lena, was always full, and its reputation as an inclusive and welcoming place continued to attract customers from all walks of life. People from the community who had once felt excluded or out of place now felt welcome, and many others who had previously seen the restaurant as inaccessible began to frequent it, drawn by the warm and sophisticated atmosphere. Maison de Prestige's successes resonated in the industry. Ethan and Lena were invited to give lectures and talks, sharing their business philosophy based on inclusion and the importance of building a respectful relationship with customers. His approach, which some initially considered risky in an exclusivity-oriented market, became a role model for other entrepreneurs who wanted to redefine their spaces and expand their reach. Meanwhile, Edwin watched these achievements from a distance, increasingly aware of the change he had brought about with his own decisions. Ethan and Lena's successes only deepened the emptiness inside. He remembered with some bitterness the times he had defended his concept of exclusivity, his conviction that a restaurant should be reserved for certain customers. The irony was cruel. What he had protected so fervently had also been what left him completely alone in a world that no longer shared his principles. Edwin's days became routine and monotonous. The life he had known, marked by prestige and recognition in his social circle, had disappeared. The people he used to associate with had left him behind, as his fall from grace and isolation had damaged not only his business, but also his relationships. In the solitude of his home, Edwin began to reflect more deeply on his past, on how his decisions and his pride had led him to that situation. For the first time in his life, Edwin realized that what he had defended as exclusivity and prestige was nothing more than an excuse to sustain his own prejudices. He had built a wall around himself and his business, convinced that he was protecting his vision, when in reality he was just insulating himself from the changes the world was demanding of him. That wall, which once gave him security, was now his prison, and there was no way to tear it down. While Maison de Prestige continued to prosper and expand its influence, Edwin faded into oblivion. His days passed in silence, with only his own thoughts and the bitter lesson that life had taught him too late. What he had lost was not just a restaurant or a reputation, but the opportunity to evolve, to change, to open his mind and heart to a world that was always beyond its own self-imposed limits. Finally, in a moment of deep reflection, Edwin understood that true prestige was not in keeping others out, but in creating a space where everyone felt welcome and valued. That realization came to him with an overwhelming weight, because he knew that it was too late to change his story. The world had moved on, and he had been caught up in his own mistakes, with the only option to accept regret and learn, even if it was in his last days, the true meaning of inclusion and respect. Over the years, Edwin sank into a life of deepening loneliness. The money he had obtained from the sale of Maison de Prestige did not give him the satisfaction he had anticipated. Without the prestige of the restaurant or the social recognition he used to receive, he felt empty and isolated in his own life, a man who had once believed he had it all and now found himself with nothing to give him meaning. Meanwhile, Maison de Prestige, under the leadership of Ethan and Lena, established itself as one of the most respected restaurants in the city. Each night the tables were packed, and the comments from customers reflected the profound change in the atmosphere of the place. The restaurant had been transformed into a meeting space, a symbol of inclusion, and became a place appreciated not only for its haute cuisine, but also for the respect that was breathed in the atmosphere. People from different backgrounds and walks of life visited the restaurant, creating a diverse community that represented the inclusive vision that Ethan and Lena had implemented. Over time, the story of how Maison de Prestige had gone from being an elitist place to an inclusive one became a case study in business schools and in talks by entrepreneurs. Ethan and Lena were invited to events and conferences where they shared their experience and lessons on the importance of a modern vision in the world of hospitality. His story inspired others to rethink the concept of exclusivity, reminding them that true business success did not depend on creating barriers, but on breaking them down. Edwin followed each of these accomplishments from a distance, feeling a mixture of regret and frustration. Maison de Prestige's notoriety grew, and with it its own isolation increased. As the community celebrated the restaurant's success, Edwin understood that his vision had become trapped in outdated ideas, and that it had been his own pride that had led him away from everything he once considered valuable. He had created an exclusive space, but he had not built a lasting legacy. Every article I read about Ethan and Lena's success was like a reminder of their own mistakes. His lack of openness and closed-mindedness had left him trapped in a kind of personal prison, and the irony of his situation was not lost on him. As the restaurant thrived and expanded, Edwin was confronted with the stark reality of his own irrelevance. He had lost the opportunity to adapt and evolve along with the business he had built, and now he only had to watch from afar as others achieved what he had never been able to understand. One night, unable to bear the weight of his own regret any longer, Edwin decided to return to Maison de Prestige in an attempt to relive a moment of connection to his old world. He approached the entrance and watched as people entered with a joy that he had never seen in his time. The restaurant had changed in such a way that it was now unfamiliar to him. The decor, the arrangement of the tables, even the attitude of the employees reflected a welcoming spirit that did not exist when he was the owner. Upon entering, he realized that he was not recognized by anyone. People were too busy enjoying the atmosphere and the food to notice an older, lonely man in a corner. He sat at a table near the entrance, feeling like a spectator of a story that was once his, but no longer belonged to him. From there, he watched Ethan and Lena move naturally between tables, chatting with customers and making sure each person felt valued and cared for. Observing the couple, Edwin finally understood the difference their approach made. For him, the restaurant had always been a status symbol, a restricted space for those who shared his idea of exclusivity. For Ethan and Lena, Maison de Prestige was so much more. It was a meeting place, a space where every customer was part of the experience, no matter who they were or where they came from. At the end of the night, Edwin got up and walked out in silence, feeling the weight of his loneliness as never before. That night, as he walked back home, he understood that he had lost something that money could never replace. I had sacrificed the opportunity to create a true legacy, one that was not based on exclusion, but on inclusion and respect. He realized that his success had been just an illusion, an empty achievement that, in the end, had only left him more alone than he had ever imagined. From that night on, Edwin stopped following the news about Maison de Prestige. Instead of feeding her resentment, she began to reflect on how her life might have been different if she had been more open-minded, if she had understood the value of inclusion sooner. The bitter lesson of his life was clear. His pride and closed-mindedness had led him to lose everything he had ever valued. Ethan and Lena continued on their journey, taking Maison de Prestige to new heights and proving that true prestige and success lie not in who can be excluded, but in how many can be included. Over the years, Edwin became a recluse, rarely seen in public, and rarely in contact with those who once formed his social circle. His life, once full of appearances and superficial recognition, was reduced to a quiet and solitary existence. Looking back, Edwin couldn't help but feel a deep nostalgia mixed with bitter regret. He knew that his prejudices had left him alone, and in his moments of greatest honesty with himself, he accepted that it had been his own ego that had led him to lose what he valued most. Meanwhile, Maison de Prestige thrived in ways Edwin would never have imagined. Not only had Ethan and Lena transformed the original restaurant, but they had also opened new locations under the same name and concept. Each new restaurant shared the same philosophy of inclusivity and respect, becoming a space where everyone felt welcome. The vision that Ethan and Lena had cultivated spread like a wave, attracting people from different communities who found in Maison de Prestige something more than a culinary experience, a symbol of acceptance and a place where diversity was valued. The success of the chain caught the attention of well-known figures in the hospitality industry, and the names of Ethan and Lena were consolidated as benchmarks in the sector. They received multiple awards and recognitions, not only for the quality of their food, but also for the positive social impact they had generated. In their speeches, Ethan and Lena talked about the power of inclusion, the importance of building a business that brings people together, and how true excellence is not measured in exclusivity, but in the ability to embrace different perspectives. Edwin heard of these successes from time to time, in mentions in newspapers or conversations he caught in passing, and each piece of news plunged him deeper into loneliness. I had lost the opportunity to be part of something big, to build a legacy that transcends exclusion, What he once considered prestige now seemed outdated and empty. Meanwhile, the world had moved on, and he had been left behind, trapped in his own limits. Finally, Edwin understood that the greatest lesson Maison de Prestige had left him was not about success or prestige, but about humanity. He understood that the true value of a business, and of life itself, was in the connection with others in respect, and in the openness to accept everyone without prejudice. This lesson, though learned too late to change his life, left a deep mark on him. In a final show of humility, Edwin wrote a letter to Ethan and Lena. He did not expect a response, but he wanted to express his regret and the recognition that they had achieved what he never could. In the letter, he admitted his mistakes, acknowledging that his prejudices had blinded him to greater and more significant success. He thanked them for making Maison de Prestige a place he could never create, and wished them to continue to thrive on his vision of inclusion and respect. Ethan and Lena received the letter, and although they never responded, they kept Edwin's words as a reminder that true change always starts with a willingness to see the world in a different way. Her story became an inspiration, a lesson in how true success lies in the ability to evolve and open your heart to everyone, no matter where they come from. And so, while Maison de Prestige continued to flourish and expand, Edwin lived the rest of his days in peace, having learned, albeit belatedly, that the true legacy one leaves in the world is the positive impact on the lives of others. Edwin's later years were quiet, if deeply introspective. Without the weight of the direction of Maison de Prestige or the image he had always projected, he began to enjoy a simple life, marked by reflection. He understood that he had never taken the time to really get to know the people around him, nor to understand the stories and dreams they brought with them. In his former world of exclusivity, he had built walls that kept him in self-imposed isolation, and now he realized how much he had lost by clinging to that limited vision. Meanwhile, Maison de Prestige continued to gain international prominence. Ethan and Lena's stories of how they had transformed an elite restaurant into a symbol of inclusion and respect were shared at various conferences and business events. People flocked not only for the great food, but for the unique atmosphere the couple had created, a place where everyone could feel valued. The brand had grown so much that Ethan and Lena began working on mentoring projects, helping other entrepreneurs implement inclusive and sustainable business models. One day, while reading an article about the achievements of Maison de Prestige, Edwin felt a sudden desire to see Ethan and Lena again, even if it was from a distance. He knew that his life was no longer linked to them or to the restaurant, but he wanted in some way to recognize in person the impact they had had, not only on the industry, but on his own life. However, he held back, feeling that, despite his regrets and written apologies, the best act of humility would be to watch from afar and allow them to continue building on their legacy without interference. Thus, Edwin continued his days in peace, watching as the world around him evolved, full of new ideas and changes that he had been slow to accept. Eventually, at the social gatherings he occasionally frequented, he would share with other entrepreneurs the story of Maison de Prestige, not as a lament, but as a reminder of the importance of adapting to the times and embracing diversity. Listeners, often young entrepreneurs, found in his words a warning about the dangers of clinging to outdated concepts and prejudices that, as Edwin had learned, only lead to isolation and loss. Ethan and Lena's legacy continued to expand as Maison de Prestige transformed into a cherished and respected institution. New generations began to know the restaurant as an emblematic place of diversity and excellence, where quality was not in exclusion, but in respect and inclusion. Edwin's story, although less and less remembered, remained as a lesson in humility and an example of how true success and prestige do not depend on exclusion, but on the ability to include and value everyone equally. In time, Edwin found an unexpected peace in his solitude. He knew his time in the business world was over, but he accepted that his last lesson, the most important of all, had been to understand the value of inclusion, something he had learned through the actions of Ethan and Lena. His days ended quietly, and although his name was not linked to a great legacy, he had found in his introspection a silent redemption. As Edwin aged, the world he had once dominated with his elitist vision seemed more and more distant. The food industry, like many others, had been completely transformed, moving towards diversity and accessibility, values that now define the best and most popular businesses. Over time, Edwin realized that the change Ethan and Lena had driven had not only influenced Maison de Prestige, but had left a deep mark on the local community and the business world. One day, while walking around town, Edwin passed by one of Maison de Prestige's new premises. The sleek, modern facade showcased a mix of tradition and warmth that invited anyone inside. From outside, he could see people of different ages and backgrounds enjoying their meals, chatting, smiling, and for a moment he felt a strange mixture of pride and humility as he saw what this place represented now. Moved by a need to do something meaningful, Edwin dedicated his final years to quietly contributing to the growth of other small entrepreneurs in his community. Using his knowledge and experience, he began to offer advice to young entrepreneurs who were looking to open their own businesses. Inspired by Ethan and Lena's vision, he focused on those who shared values of inclusion and accessibility, encouraging them to build companies with a strong foundation of respect and openness to all. Over time, Edwin began to see these small businesses flourish, many of them driven by the same philosophy that had led to Maison de Prestige's success. Although he was never publicly recognized for his contribution, the satisfaction of seeing others thrive and learn from their mistakes brought him unexpected peace. For Edwin, this was more valuable than any recognition or wealth he had gained in his previous life. As his health began to deteriorate, Edwin found comfort in knowing that he had done his best to rectify his mistakes, even if it was in a humble and anonymous way. Through the businesses he had helped to promote, he felt that, in a way, he had left a positive contribution to the world. His legacy, though small and unobtrusive, was now a reminder of how changes in heart and mindset can lead to lasting impact. In his final days, Edwin reflected on the long and difficult road he had traveled to come to that understanding. He understood that he could not undo the past, but he also understood that every act of humility and generosity he had performed in his later years had allowed him to find personal redemption. This is how Edwin, who had once clung to the concept of exclusivity, ended his days in peace, knowing that his life in the end had found a different and valuable purpose. Ethan and Lena never knew about Edwin's discreet work or his change of perspective. For them, Maison de Prestige continued as a symbol of change and transformation, and they continued to expand their legacy through new projects, each inspired by the values they stood for. And though their paths never crossed again, Ethan and Lena's influence lingered in Edwin's life and in those he had quietly helped flourish. Edwin spent his final years seeing the impact of his quiet labor from the sidelines, feeling a deep but quiet satisfaction in knowing that, despite his past mistakes, he had found a way to contribute in a positive way. In every small business he advised, he noticed the spark of enthusiasm and determination of young entrepreneurs, and he saw in them the opportunity to correct the mistakes he himself had made in his time. However, Edwin knew that his time in this world was coming to an end. Aware of this, he decided to write one last document, a kind of farewell letter and personal reflection, which he titled Lessons from a Life of Learning. In this letter, without giving many details about his personal life, he described his path from pride and exclusion to understanding the true value of inclusion and respect. Edwin's intention was that the letter could inspire others to avoid falling into the same mistakes and help them build businesses that celebrate diversity and welcome everyone. The letter was sent to several young entrepreneurs with whom he had worked, and unbeknownst to Edwin, became popular reading in some business circles in the city. His message especially resonated with those who were starting their careers and wanted to build something that would truly add value to their community. Although few knew who the author was, his words left a mark, an enduring message about the importance of adapting, evolving, and, above all, valuing each person who passes through our lives. On the day Edwin departed this world, few really knew who he had been, or the role he had played in the history of Maison de Prestige. However, his story somehow was still alive. His legacy, though anonymous, lived on in each of the businesses he had helped to promote, and in the values that a new generation of entrepreneurs now defended. Ethan and Lena, meanwhile, continued to expand Maison de Prestige, taking it to new cities and continents, sharing their vision and philosophy in each new location they opened. Over time, the restaurant became an institution, an international symbol of how hospitality is not only about offering a quality culinary experience, but also about opening the doors of the heart and creating a space where everyone feels respected and valued. The Maison de Prestige's story continued to resonate for years to come, inspiring others to build businesses that challenged exclusion and celebrated inclusion. In every corner of the restaurant, at every table occupied by people from different cultures and backgrounds, in every smile of a satisfied customer, was present the essence of a transformation that had begun quietly and had now blossomed into something far greater than anyone, including Edwin, could have imagined. Although his name was not remembered, the lesson Edwin left for the world continued, like a whisper in every success story inspired by inclusion, in every business that understood that true prestige lies in embracing everyone equally. Years after Edwin's departure, Maison de Prestige's impact continued to grow. Ethan and Lena set about expanding the restaurant's concept into new cities, adapting each location to reflect the diversity and inclusive spirit that had become the essence of the brand. No matter where they opened a new location, the warm and welcoming atmosphere attracted people from all walks of life and cultures, creating a space where any customer felt valued. The new restaurants maintained the essence of Maison de Prestige, but also adopted elements unique to each community in which they were located. The decoration, ingredients, and even some dishes were adapted according to the local culture, creating a sense of belonging for each customer. The experience was no longer just about offering exquisite food, but about making each customer feel part of something bigger, of a community that celebrated differences. The years of expansion also led Ethan and Lena to launch training initiatives for entrepreneurs, focused on those who wanted to learn how to build inclusive and respectful businesses. Workshops were organized, mentoring programs were developed, and many young entrepreneurs began to apply the same principles of inclusion and respect in their own businesses, inspired by the story of Maison de Prestige. Ethan and Lena became bellwether in the hospitality industry, and their story of rescuing and transforming the restaurant resonated with the industry. Over time, Maison de Prestige received several awards for its social and business impact, and the restaurant's history was recognized as an exemplary case of positive change in the business world. For Ethan and Lena, each recognition was a reminder that their decisions and values had not only changed the course of a restaurant, but had transformed entire lives and communities. At a gala event, where they received a Social Innovation Award, Lena mentioned in her speech that the true success of a business was not in how exclusive it could be, but in how it managed to connect and enrich the community. "It's not exclusivity that defines a prestigious place," Lena said, "but its ability to welcome and value every person who walks through its door." Maison de Prestige continued to be a space where Ethan and Lena's values were reflected in every detail, from the quality of service to respect for each customer. The influence of this inclusive model expanded in the industry, and other businesses began to follow suit, understanding that true prestige and success are found in embracing everyone without exception. Although Edwin was no longer around to see the full scope of Maison de Prestige's transformation, the legacy of inclusion and respect he helped inspire, albeit indirectly, continued in every new opening, in every satisfied customer, and in every entrepreneur who learned from the principles Ethan and Lena had championed. In that sense, the story of Maison de Prestige lived on, showing the world that true change is born of openness and humility, values that, in the end, Edwin had come to understand. Over time, Maison de Prestige became a household name in the world of gastronomy, both locally and internationally. The story of their transformation and Ethan and Lena's inclusive approach resonated across industries, with each new restaurant they opened carrying with it not only their fine cuisine, but also their philosophy of openness, respect, and celebration of diversity. In each location, there was a special essence, an atmosphere where each person was welcomed and appreciated. The decor, menus, and style of each location reflected a unique blend of cultures, adapting to the context and community of each city where they opened their doors. The impact of Maison de Prestige was not limited to customers, but also touched the employees who worked there. Ethan and Lena made sure to create an inclusive work environment where every employee, regardless of their background, felt valued and heard. They organized trainings that fostered empathy, respect, and understanding of different cultures. Employees not only saw their work as a job opportunity, but as an extension of the values they themselves wanted to defend. Maison de Prestige became a model for how inclusion not only attracts customers, but also creates a more united and engaged workforce. Over the years, Ethan and Lena continued to support young entrepreneurs through their mentoring and training program. Inspired by their own experience, they helped others build businesses based on inclusion, teaching them that true prestige and success are in embracing each client and creating a positive impact in their communities. They organized conferences and workshops in various cities, sharing their story and encouraging others to challenge prejudice and create companies where everyone was welcome. At one of these workshops, a young entrepreneur approached Ethan and said, "The Maison de Prestige story changed the way I look at my business. I used to think that exclusivity was the key, but now I understand that the real value is in how we can include everyone." For Ethan, those moments were the true reward of his effort. Seeing how her experiences inspired others to create spaces of inclusion and respect gave her deep satisfaction. As the Maison de Prestige's legacy grew, Ethan and Lena were also looking for ways to give back to the communities that had welcomed them. They began to collaborate with local organizations in social projects, supporting initiatives that promoted education, equal opportunities, and respect for diversity. This connection to communities not only strengthened their brand, but allowed them to create a real and lasting impact on the lives of many people. What began as a transformation in a restaurant had grown into a broader movement, inspiring many to build a more inclusive society. Over time, Maison de Prestige was recognized as much more than a restaurant chain. It was a symbol of change and hope. The restaurant's story was featured in business books, was the subject of case studies at universities, and documentaries were even produced about the impact Ethan and Lena had had on the industry and society. Her story was told as an example of how the values of openness and respect can be at the core of a successful and sustainable business, and how true greatness lies in the ability to adapt and value everyone equally. Although he was no longer around to see this expansion and recognition, Edwin left a mark on the history of Maison de Prestige, albeit in an indirect way. His mistake and subsequent repentance became a reminder about the importance of humility and the ability to recognize the value in all people, no matter where they come from. His life had served as a lesson for himself, and through his experience, for others who knew his story. Over the generations, Maison de Prestige continued to thrive and evolve, but always maintaining the essence that Ethan and Lena had established. Through their actions, they demonstrated that success was not in exclusion, but in connection, inclusion, and creating a space where every person, no matter their story or background, felt welcome. And so, the legacy of Maison de Prestige remained a beacon of inspiration, proof that true prestige lies in shared humanity and in the power to open doors to all. Decades later, Maison de Prestige had become a global institution. It was no longer just a chain of restaurants. It was a movement that inspired entrepreneurs, companies, and organizations from different sectors to incorporate the values of inclusion and diversity into their DNA. The brand was synonymous with positive change, respect, and genuine connection with people. Ethan and Lena, while still active, had passed the leadership to a new generation of leaders who shared their vision and commitment to the company's founding principles. The new management introduced innovations that reinforced the values of Maison de Prestige. They initiated sustainability programs to support local farmers and producers in each city where they operated, ensuring that the supply chain directly benefited communities. Through partnerships with non-profit organizations, Maison de Prestige funded education and training projects for people in vulnerable situations, helping more people have the opportunity to thrive. Ethan and Lena's story was immortalized in books and documentaries that chronicled their incredible journey from initial challenges to creating an empire of hospitality based on empathy and human connection. Universities used his story as a case study in their business programs, and his legacy was shared at international conferences on leadership and social responsibility. Maison de Prestige became a model for companies seeking to be profitable without losing their humanity. In the midst of this growth, a young aspiring entrepreneur found an old copy of Edwin's letter. which had been kept and shared as part of the Maison de Prestige's historical archive. The letter, while anonymous to many, was a reminder of how a single person's decisions and biases can have a profound impact both on one's own life and on the lives of others. For the young entrepreneur, the letter served as an inspiration, reminding him of the importance of staying humble, open to change and willing to listen. Edwin's story, though not widely known, lived on in those words, a warning not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Over the years, Maison de Prestige became a space that celebrated anniversaries, weddings, and important events of people from all over the world. The experience of dining at one of their restaurants was more than just enjoying a great meal. It was an experience in which each client felt respected and valued. The staff continued to receive constant training in diversity and empathy, and the atmosphere in each location reflected the principles that Ethan and Lena had championed from the beginning. The restaurant network grew to span different continents, and in each new market, Maison de Prestige managed to adapt to the local culture without losing its essence. The idea that respect and inclusion were the most valuable ingredients remained strong, and every new team in every country devotedly followed this philosophy. Ethan and Lena, although already in their later years, saw how their legacy continued to expand, knowing that Maison de Prestige had transcended their own initial dreams. At a gala event to mark the 50th anniversary of Maison de Prestige, Ethan and Lena took to the stage to receive special recognition. Moved, they thanked everyone present and the team that had made their vision possible. In his closing words, Ethan said, "We didn't just build a restaurant. We build a space where everyone, no matter where they come from, feels at home. That is the true purpose of Maison de Prestige, and I hope that this essence continues in every corner where one of our stores exists." Over time, Maison de Prestige became a legend, a reference of how the business world could and should be transformed, leading with respect and empathy. The story of its creation, transformation, and legacy remained alive at every table occupied, in every dish served, and in every smile of the customers who generation after generation continued to come to its doors. And so, Maison de Prestige stayed true to its original mission, a place where true inclusion was the main course, and where the spirit of Ethan, Lena, and the lessons learned from Edwin continued to inspire everyone. Over the years, Maison de Prestige established itself as an enduring symbol of inclusion and empathy, transcending generations. Ethan and Lena, now retired and in their golden years, watched with satisfaction as their legacy continued to live on and thrive. The restaurant chain had grown exponentially, and each new location retained the essence of warmth and openness they had cultivated from the beginning. The brand was no longer just a business, but a constant reminder of how respect and acceptance can transform any space into a home for everyone. In their final days, Ethan and Lena were honored with the title of Global Hospitality Ambassadors at an international ceremony. There, surrounded by leaders from around the world, they expressed their gratitude and hope that Maison de Prestige would continue to inspire others. "Our dream," Lena said excitedly, "was to create a place where everyone, no matter their story, could feel welcome and respected. Seeing how this vision has transcended our expectations is the greatest gift we could receive." When they finally said goodbye to active management, they left the company in the hands of their children and a team committed to their vision. The story of Maison de Prestige became a legend shared in books and case studies around the world. The name of Ethan and Lena, along with the memory of Edwin and his teachings, continued to inspire new entrepreneurs who wanted to change the world from respect, humanity, and inclusion. Thus, Maison de Prestige endured, passing from generation to generation as a legacy of love and empathy, always remembering that true prestige is not found in exclusivity, but in the ability to embrace everyone.